This man should be arrested for war crimes. JP Morgan paid him off for the Iraq War. 3 months after we invaded Iraq, he held up the Iraq Bank for $20 billion. He was then paid $6 million every year and still is from JP Morgan 6 months after he left office. The man is a war criminal.
David, it was very dramatic to see you burst into the Leveson Inquiry and stop the war. We were certainly very happy when it happened, but also just thinking, how did you get in there? Could you describe how you did it? Had you planned it before? Was it spontaneous?
It was a bit spontaneous, only that I'd heard that morning on the news that Blair was going to appear in the Leveson Inquiry, and ever since since the Chilcot Inquiry began, I've been looking out for times when he's going to appear in public, so that I can go and try and carry out my right and give him a citizen's arrest for the crimes against humanity in the Iraq War. And going into the Leveson Inquiry was ridiculously easy. I went through the main entrance to the courts, through the metal detectors, as any member of the public could, because there's so many courts there. It's one entrance for all the courts. Then I just quickly found through the signs the Leveson Inquiry. I actually walked in the front door once and sat down, but they'd all gone out for a tea break kind of thing, as the stenographers were making their notes. And I was quickly asked to leave by some security guard because I didn't have the correct accreditation to be there. Then I thought, well, wait a minute, Leveson hasn't come out this front door for his tea. There's a back way in where the judges go in. I'll go down a floor and go around the back and see if I can find it. Down one floor there were some police, but down 2 floors there weren't. So I went down 2 floors, along the corridor, round the back, and up the back stairs to where the court was, and there was not one soul standing at the open door to where Leveson enters the court 73. Then first of all I bottled it a little bit, and I was pretty scared because I just thought that if I get done for this, I don't want to be locked up, and I don't want to go to prison or anything. So I went away and found a bathroom and phoned my mum up and said, what do you think I should do this? And she said, yeah, go on, get in there and do it, because she knew how passionate I am about my cause. So I burst in, and I think the rest has been pretty well documented on the TV as to what I said next.
I mean, what motivated you to do it?
Well, it's just that I think like millions of people, and the 2 million people who marched on those marches in this country, I just never believed all those lies that Blair spun out about the weapons of mass destruction, the dodgy dossier. And why go to all those lengths when you knew that we all knew, and it was pretty clear that Saddam Hussein didn't have any weapons, and at the time his country was actually on its knees after 10 years of sanctions. So there was, I suddenly got suspicious that there must be lots of other reasons for the Iraq War. Doing a bit of research, it's not hard to find out that many oil companies, construction companies, pharmaceutical companies, arms companies from both America and England, had gained from invading Iraq. Most obviously because of the oil, that's the biggest thing there. And
you've spoken about the lies that really outraged you and made you want to do this. Lying has become synonymous with Blair. We call him Blair. What did you think of Tony Blair's performance at the Leveson Inquiry?
Well, Blair is an extremely clever man, and a master of spin, and a master of diffusion, and a master of lying. You'll notice he uses his hands a lot, and so on and so forth. I think the lies go out through his hands, and that's the sign, sort of little lie detector. Yeah. But there's so much on the internet that just it's a tremendous amount of circumstantial evidence to show that he stood to make millions out of the Iraq War. And when 500,000 people lose their lives, including the 179 British soldiers, I just think it's one of those situations where if for evil to prevail, it just takes good men to do nothing. It's that old cliche. I know it's a cliche, but it's true. And it's time that we all, from our generation, stood up to do something about it.
And this obviously his appearance at the Leveson Inquiry was to do with his relationship with Murdoch and the Murdoch press. What do you think was the role of Murdoch and his papers in driving us to war and his relationship with Blair?
Well, that's interesting because since I've been arrested, I noticed in the Times I was pretty much slagged off, and also the Sun of, they didn't paint a bad picture of me, but it wasn't a great picture. And I think that Blair and Murdoch were great friends. I think he's a godfather to one of Murdoch's children or something. So I don't think he was going to say anything particularly negative about Murdoch in the Leveson Inquiry either. And probably again was, I don't know about lying, but I wasn't so interested in the Leveson story. I think that that enough has been said on the Murdoch thing, and certainly there were some disgusting things happening. And it's taking Leveson an incredibly long time to come to some conclusions about the grey-haired old media tycoon who doesn't seem to remember anything. But that wasn't my point and why I was there. My point was because I don't want to see this country ever again invaded country for imperious reasons and killing millions of people.
And you've talked about the real reasons behind why this government took us to war in Iraq. The motivation of oil and the money that's still to be made. How has Tony Blair personally profited out of this war?
Well, you look on the websites, you can see that J.P. Morgan, the biggest bank, one of the biggest banks in America, paid a bit of money. I think not that much, but they paid about $100,000 into the Bush campaign to get Bush elected in the first place. Then, just 3 months after we invaded Iraq, which is what I said in the court, they were shoring up with a load of other banks, American banks. They were shoring up the whole of Iraqi economy for later mortgaging of the oil to pay them back for about $20 billion. And then, lo and behold, just after Blair left office in 2007. 6 months later, he left it 6 months almost to the day when he was suddenly signed by J.P. Morgan for advice, for $5 million every year, which on a retainer, which he still gets $5 million a year since the Iraq War, since he left office in 2007. And when you add that up with the Kuwaiti royal family also giving Blair £1 million for advice, UI Energy, a Korean oil company, paying him millions. Whilst bombs were going off, I should say, in about 2007, the news that he was getting money from a Korean oil company came on a day when about at least 200 people were being killed in Baghdad. And then he turns around in church and says that he's a God-fearing Catholic. And you just say, excuse me, sorry, so all this money, I'm sorry, I just didn't believe it. I just thought, well, hang on, we were sent there on a pack of lies, and now you're making millions and accepting those millions, and then to try and give the money from his book, The Journey formula, to the British Legion as a little bit of a cover-up. And I said, I think that probably answered that question. Sorry, you cut that, and I'll just say something else. What was that I was going to say?
So it's clear that Blair has gained a lot of personal wealth out of this, but isn't he part of the past now? I mean, what power does he exercise now, if any, and what's,
Well, yes, you say that, but let's think back to, the war criminals of the Second World War. The Nazi hunters have been, still to this day, are trying to get 90-year-old men in court for the war crimes from the Second World War. John Demajannik was 89, he was the oldest war criminal ever to appear in The Hague and died in prison in the end. And I will never stop, because you cannot, and I think it's only right that we do not stop trying to get these people into The Hague, war criminals. Otherwise, the world will eventually implode.
And I mean, if Blair was brought to justice, what do you think could be done to repay the huge crimes that he's committed?
Well, not much. I just think that wouldn't it be wonderful just to see him locked up in a prison cell for the rest of his life? There's not, and then perhaps the Iraqis will ask for some sort of compensation, and there'll be some sort of case against that to get some of the money back. But who knows? That's their money, I think.
And what would be the wider significance of that? Of bringing him to justice?
Well, yes, well, it would certainly send a message to the Middle East to start showing a little bit more of the old respect that Britain had once upon a time before Blair came along. I mean, we've lost so much respect in siding with the Americans in their imperialist wars in Afghanistan and in Iraq, that we need to re-establish our good name, which we built up before then, and relatively good name throughout the world.
And I mean, do you think it will ever happen? Can we bring Blair to justice, and how?
Well, that's the big question. There is a lot of tremendous amount of support. I've had a remarkable amount of people. Yesterday I was on a radio station on a phone-in, and the radio presenter on LBC said that at least 90% of the people phoning in were supporting me. And you hear that, and there was the 2 million that went on the march. And my feeling is that the majority of people, at least 80% of the people in this country, would like to see something done about Blair. And if we can get, say 1 million people signing a petition online, which there is one on the War Crimes Foundation, if you put War Crimes Foundation in, you'll see a place to sign a petition. It will eventually demonstrations do eventually get through. It takes years sometimes, but they do eventually work, and it is the only power we have as the public. So we should exercise that right as much and as often as we possibly can.
I absolutely agree with that. My final question really is well, it's one for Blair, but if you could ask Tony Blair one question, if you had a one-to-one with him, what would it be?
I'd like to know, did you really think you'd get away with it? I think the thing was, I think that him and Bush, when Bush made that announcement on the USS Abraham Lincoln only 3 months after we invaded, that it was mission accomplished. I think they just thought that the war would be over straight away, which it sort of, the initial invasion was, but they didn't foresee and could never have foreseen the hellish civil war that was going to go on afterwards. And that's when they got caught with their hands in the till, because 4 or 5 years later, to take all this money, no one would have noticed had it been a walkover, as when Bush said, and that's how they've been caught out by the amount of time it took for that war to finally resolve. And I just want to add one little final thing at the end of this little interview. I think it was interesting, if you look back at the footage of me breaking in at the Leveson, just after I left, Blair immediately said, "I just want to say there's no truth in what he just said," or words to that effect. Don't quote, there's not quite what he said. But if you look at that film, why would he take all that effort for one simple little intruder coming into the Leveson Inquiry, which had nothing to do with their acting? It looked to me like it was racked with guilt at that point. And I firmly believe he was.
Thank you, David.
No, pleasure.
That's excellent. How's that so far?
Can I just say, actually, on the record, what he said about Iraq and JP Morgan is completely and totally untrue. I've never had a discussion with them about that.